Today, we're digging into a really tough but incredibly important story based on the book Goodna Girls. It shares the oral histories of children who were locked away inside an adult psychiatric hospital in Australia. It's a story about survival, about injustice, and what happens when a system meant to protect children fails them completely.
Let's start with this quote from a woman who went by two names, Jean and Erin. Her journey, which started with her running away from an abusive home, pulls back the curtain on a system that failed a child in need at every single turn. Jean's story is just a brutal example of a kid being punished for their own trauma. She was passed through this so-called protection system, but every move was just an escalation. She wasn't treated like a victim. She was treated like a problem that needed to be locked away. I mean, just look at this timeline. At 11, she runs away from a foster home, so she's sent to an institution. She defends another girl from a beating. She gets sent somewhere even worse. Each step was a punishment for what the state, and this is a chilling phrase, called non-criminal conduct. And the punishment for her just trying to survive was, well, it's hard to even imagine. At this place, Carla House, Jean was thrown into solitary confinement for 32 days. Her whole world became a dark room, a rough sack to sleep on, and a potty.
So how does a kid even survive that? Well, in that darkness, Jean's imagination became her only escape. She created a safe place, a meadow for her younger self. And to protect that little girl, as she says here, she imagined this powerful guardian, a big Black Panther.
And you have to understand, Jean's experience, as horrific as it is, wasn't some kind of one-off mistake. It was the direct result of a much bigger system, a whole way of thinking that treated vulnerable kids not as victims who needed help, but as problems that had to be managed. This whole system was built on an idea called penal welfarism. It basically meant that kids could be locked up for what they called welfare offenses, things like being uncontrollable or exposed to moral danger. It essentially made being a traumatized kid a crime. If you want to get inside the heads of the people who made these policies, just listen to this quote from a government minister back in 1956. They didn't see children who needed care. They saw a social infection, like a disease that society had to be protected from. So this way of thinking led to the use of what the sociologist Erving Goffman called total institutions. Places like these asylums and orphanages weren't really about helping people. They were designed to cut people off from the rest of the world, to contain that so-called contamination. And this just shows the massive disconnect between PR and reality. On the one hand, you've got this glossy brochure for the Columina Lovely Home. Looks nice, right? But then you hear from survivors like Judy, who said she was literally held in a cage there. It's a world apart from the image the state was selling. For the girls that the system considered the most difficult, the most recalcitrant, the end of the line was a place called Wolston Park. It was Queensland's oldest and biggest mental health facility, and it was a place no child should have ever had to see. Just try to imagine it. You're a teenager. You haven't committed a crime, and you're locked away in an adult psychiatric ward, housed right alongside criminally insane patients. These girls, some as young as 13, were thrown into this world of incredible violence and neglect. So was there therapy? Was there support? No. There were drugs, a lot of drugs. This is just a partial list of the heavy-duty antipsychotics and sedatives they were given. The point wasn't to treat them, it was to control them, to keep them in a stupor. This kind of chemical restraint led to overdoses, lifelong health issues, and it left them totally vulnerable. And being kept in that drug state, it left the girls completely defenseless. Jean's testimony here is it's horrific. It shows how vulnerable they were to being physically and sexually assaulted by staff, by other patients, with absolutely no one to turn to for help. You know, the nightmare didn't end when they finally walked out of those institutions. The trauma they endured in so-called care cast a shadow over their entire lives, often starting a vicious cycle of poverty, homelessness, and even more time behind bars.
There's actually a term for this now: care criminalization. The idea is that instead of getting help for their trauma, the kids' natural reactions, acting out, being angry, were punished.
and that punishment pushed them straight from the care system into the criminal justice system. The numbers on this are just staggering. Check this out. A recent survey in Australia found that 63%, almost 2/3, of homeless young people had been in out-of-home care. The very system that was supposed to protect them became a direct pipeline to the streets. And it's not just homelessness. The link to the justice system is just as clear. Research shows that kids from care are at least 9 times more likely to end up tangled in the youth justice system. It's one institution feeding right into the next. So what happened next? Well, for decades, the Goodna Girls and so many other survivors have been fighting, just relentlessly fighting for recognition, for some form of justice, and really just for people to finally listen to their stories and believe them. And here's one of the cruelest twists in this whole thing. In 1998, there was a major inquiry into abuse in Queensland institutions. But because Wolston Park was technically a mental hospital under the Mental Health Act, not a children's home, the girls who suffered there were excluded. A legal technicality silenced them all over again. But they just refused to be forgotten. Through years of campaigning and survivor-led advocacy, memorials like this one have been put up. They're permanent, public reminders of what happened and of the incredible courage of the people who went through. And that road to justice has been so long. It's been a fight, step by painful step. From the first journalist breaking the story in '96, to the government's apology in 2010, and then finally removing some of the legal roadblocks, every bit of progress was hard-won. And for survivors like Jean, the past is never really in the past. As she says here, the girl from Wolston Park is still right there. She's a reflection in the mirror, a part of her that never leaves. The stories of the Goodna Girls really force us to ask ourselves a very hard question. Their history isn't just some dark chapter from the past. It's a living, breathing reminder of the deep scars that are left behind and of our collective duty to make sure that a failure of care this massive can never, ever happen again.